Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories, each one inspired by true events. This is episode 10. Let the nightmare begin. Among the silent stars, I launched myself with a radio receiver and jerked up the mouthpiece. I wiped away the film of sweat from my forehead before replying. Receiving. My throat was tight with a lump the size of a golf ball. It's good to hear your voice, comrade. You too. How are you doing? Leaning towards the porthole, I stared out into the cold void, hoping to catch some glimpse of the Soyuz capsule somewhere out in the twinkling stars. All systems great. Amazing view of the Pacific right now. Have you managed to reach ground control yet? Comms are still down because of the solar flares, I guess. Should be back up in a couple of hours. I hope so. The lump in my throat was getting bigger, pressing against the wall of my windpipe. I swallowed, trying to make room for my next words. I get worried up here on my own. Only 7 days to go now, Alexei. I'm sure you can last that long. I'll see you then. I can't wait until you get here. Talk to you soon. I put down the mouthpiece and turned back to the porthole, pressing my eyes into the great blackness, to the divine curve of the Earth's glowing horizon. Without flight engineer Dmitry Sokolov, the station seemed very empty indeed. It was 100 cubic meters of beeping radios, flashing lights, and often blaring alarms. But silence slid beneath these thin distractions, an ever-present threat. Soon enough, I would tune out all the noises and fall into a state of uncomfortable, clutching reticence. I sighed uncomfortably, suddenly extremely self-aware, and tore back from the porthole. Pulling myself through the stale air, I headed for the living area. The sliding door, which led to the cramped toilet compartment, was half open, and it squealed as I pushed it into the closed position, the sudden noise making me cringe. The half-hearted chuckle that spilled from my lips was a force of habit. There was no one else on the station to hear it. I had no appetite for the generic meat in my food storage cupboard. Truth be told, I hadn't eaten more than a packet of dried apricots, a couple of crackers, and some meat spread in the last 2 days. If the people back on the ground knew how little I'd eaten, they would have had me on the Soyuz and heading for re-entry in the blink of an eye. If I hadn't been out of contact with them, I might have even considered telling them just to get off. With no appetite, I decided to call it a day. It was then a simple matter of flicking off the main cabin lights, crawling into the restraints of my sleeping compartment, and praying that the station wouldn't fall apart while I was asleep. It was warm, uncomfortably warm. The fabric of the sleeping bag clung to my skin, slick with sweat. I fumbled with the zip, my fingers slipping on the cold metal. The air in the capsule was like tar, and I swam through it with an uncomfortable lethargy. The thermometer displayed the temperature of 19.8 degrees Celsius, exactly as it had the day before and the day before that. That's got to be a mistake. I tapped the screen as if that would somehow make it display change, but it just ended up leaving a sticky finger mark on the glowing green glass. Either way, I needed a shower. I used the back of my forearm to clean off my forehead and sighed. This could wait. It was probably just another sensor problem that I wouldn't be qualified to fix. The whole place was probably only ever one fault from depressurizing and spiraling back down to earth, as brittle as a feather. The violent hissing of the shower and the cold pressure of the water sluiced away my deep-rooted misgivings. I couldn't focus on my problems while I briskly rubbed my skin clean with the harsh soap bar. Once I was clean and suitably refreshed, I turned the knob, and the last bubbles of water floated gently out of the nozzle. With the sound of rushing water gone, I became aware of the noises of the station again, in particular a muffled voice. Shit, I banged my head on the shower cubicle roof as I attempted to spin myself round and climb out the door. It left a mark on the gray plastic. Not wanting to miss whoever was on the radio, I ignored the stinging pain and pulled myself naked across the space station, toweling myself as I went. OPS, 3D read? OPS, 3D read. Receiving Soyuz 21. Breathlessly, I muttered into the mouthpiece. I'd almost given up on you. Sorry, I was showering. Well, I'm glad I reached you. I was beginning to think we were alone up here, comrade. At least you're not the only one on the Soyuz. I'm all alone out here on Salyut. You're lucky, my friend. Flight engineer Sergei Antonov is starting to drive me crazy. Only 6 more days to go. For you, maybe. I have my whole mission to complete. I gave a sympathetic chuckle. I sympathized with Commander Nikolai Vostrikov. I truly did. Ever since my partner flight engineer Dmitry Sokolov had got himself a ticket home by accidentally chopping off 3 of his fingers in the airlock door. Vostrikov had managed to keep my spirits up. He had managed to keep me working. He had managed to keep me hopeful. Vostrikov was a great man. He would be hailed as a hero back home when his mission was finished, I was sure. How are you doing anyway? It's warm. It's too warm up here. I'm not sure how it can be so hot inside, yet so cold outside. Vostrikov was audibly alarmed. What's your thermometer reading? 19.8, as always. It's probably a sensor problem, don't worry. Alexei, it's fine, Commander, honestly. I'm only slightly too hot. A couple of degrees, maybe. Well, you radio me straight away if it gets any hotter. Don't worry. He would worry, I could tell by the sound of his voice. Well then, I must leave you. See you soon, my friend. 6 days to go, I confirmed before clipping the mouthpiece back into position on the radio set. The rest of the day was a constant battle against heat. Communication with the ground was still out because of the solar flares. So I attempted to remedy the problem myself by hand. That started with the simple task of running diagnostic programs on the central computer. But after that denied there was any problems whatsoever. I hit a brick wall. My mind ran, dredging up hundreds of semi-rendered memories of endless technical documents and cosmonaut manuals. The black diagrams and minute labels all seemed to melt, twisting into impossible shapes, non-Euclidean planes that boggled my mind. I couldn't quite think in the straight lines required for a task like this at the moment. In the heat, everything span or spiraled in and out of my mind's eye. Concentration, it was safe to say, was not high. In my head, I was back in Dimitri's last day with me on the station. It was hotter than I remembered in the feverish flashback. Dimitri's brow glistened as he climbed down, extending his massive frame out of the tiny airlock. He gave a relieved gasp, glad to finally move his limbs without slamming them against the walls. I watched him from my seat by the main control console, my eyes aching from looking at the monochrome screen for several hours. I called out something to him, not in control of my own actions or speech. Whatever it was, for it was muted in my memory, overshadowed by what came next, made him turn. As he did, he placed one hand on the metal rim of the airlock to keep himself steady. Dimitri replied with a chuckle and an equally muted reply. His lips were blurred in my flashback. Indeed, the entire man's outline was slightly fuzzy in my memory, but the lack of clarity was most noticeable around his face. He was now just an out-of-focus photograph in the dark recesses of my cortexes. We finished talking, and Dimitri reached up for the handle on the hatch. He turned back to face me just as he pulled, and brought down the sharp blade of metal. It dropped onto his other fingers with a sickening thump. The jarring blow shook me out of my recollection, jerking my head up into an upright position. I gasped for air, and my head instinctively turned to the scene of the accident. There was still a small blood smear down the side of the hatch. Had the noise of metal hitting metal that was still echoing in my ears been real? Or was it just part of the memory? In my heat-addled state, it was hard to tell. The thermometer was still reading 19.8. I shook myself out of the odd stupor, which sent hundreds of tiny sweat droplets floating across the cabin. The armpits of my top were damp, as was all down my back and crotch area. The temperature must be rising. Thump! There it was again. Despite the heat, the sound sent chills down my spine. In any case, I knew it was just space junk or the metal expanding. But it was unsettling enough for me to give the capsule a nervous once-over, before returning to my previous train of thought. Soyuz 21, do you read? I picked up the radio microphone, still distracted by the glare of the main console, where the display still read 19.8 degrees Celsius. Receiving OPS 3. Any contact with ground yet, Commander? I need to get a fix on this thermostat problem. Negative, Alexei. Still nothing. Is it getting worse? I can cope, but if it persists for 2 or 3 days. I trailed off, putting down the receiver to wipe my forehead again. I could just see my reflection in the edge of the porthole, and he looked very sweaty indeed. White salt crystals stuck to my forearm in the rapidly drying sweat. Well, we'll keep trying. It'll be fixed in a couple of hours more. I'm sure of it. I hope so, or I'll have to take another shower. You're still getting a reading of 19.8? Vostrikov's voice carried a note of apprehension in it, even over the airwaves. Afraid so. Don't worry. We'll be back in contact with the ground soon, and they'll know what to do. I'm sure it's just a sensor problem, something minor like that. Speak to you soon, my friend, and drink plenty of water. I will, don't worry. I laughed. That man was acting like my mother, with Vostrikov no better equipped to solve the problem than I was. I relented to a policy of acceptance to the problem. If I couldn't solve it, at least I could cope with it. The heat reduced my appetite even further, but I headed to the kitchen in hope of forcing down some crackers and water. I rifled through the storage cupboards, looking for something that wouldn't turn my stomach, and at the lack of crackers, eventually settled on a nondescript dried beef I found in one of the white packets. It reeked of meat, an acrid, pungent stink which set my abdomen churning, but I swallowed it down nonetheless. Dried beef's scent clung to the kitchen walls even after I had finished the package. My mouth was now even drier, so I mixed up some of the powder orange juice. It tasted nothing like orange. In fact, it was some cocktail of harsh chemicals, but it washed away the salty tang of the beef. I wiped my mouth and discarded the plastic container, sending it trailing small globules of sticky orange liquid across the air. After my small meal, a heavy weight was sitting on my stomach. It sloshed around in the chasms of my lower body as I moved around the station, warm and stinging. I had to clamp my throat shut to stop myself from throwing up on several occasions. The day passed with an uncomfortable malaise that made the discomfort in my stomach and head even worse. I watched the hours tick away on the main console clock as I made my measurements, recordings of the sun, or of the box of crystals that grew in the science lab area of the station. Eventually, I could almost take the drudgery no longer. Every surface in the station was covered in sweaty palm prints by the time the day was done, and my hair was nearly sodden. There was no way I could sleep in heat like this, I had decided. So when I couldn't last the treacle consistency of waking consciousness for a minute longer, I relented to the sleeping pills. They sat in a tiny white bottle in the very back of the medicine compartment, and at the very start of the mission, I had sworn never to take them. Unfortunately, today, there was no other option. Dimming the station lights and crawling into the hot confines of my sleeping bag, I looked at the pale, white pills in my palm. They had a slight scent of mint to them. In one decisive movement, I quashed all hesitation, all internal protest, closed my eyes, and swallowed. I was out like a light. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the temperature. A gentle cold breeze lapped around my face, probably emanating from air pumps that whirred gently on the edges of my earshot. My watch, set to Alma at a time for my launch at Baikonur, warned me I had been asleep only 3 hours. The station was still dark as I slid open the sleeping compartment door, although I was thankful for the respite in the heat and bright light. I stretched, cracking the vertebrae in my back. Here in the cool dark, I no longer felt feverish or nauseous, just tired. Slowly, as my eyes adjusted, I pulled myself over towards the radio set and considered calling Soyuz 21. The air still tasted stale. The tang of sweat and dried beef hung in it, even after it was recycled hundreds of times through endless filters and pumps. Even so, there was a certain calm to the station with the lights off and the temperature down. I looked out the porthole, and even the frigid depths of the universe seemed less inhospitable. There was a gentle navy tinge to the infinite blackness, perhaps, and the glow of the stars seemed less harsh. This, along with the weightlessness and the gentle purr of the air pumps, gave the whole scene a dreamlike quality, as if I was safely cocooned in a great white chrysalis that floated through the spiraling arms of far-off galaxies, or across the peaks and valleys of great, sparkling nebula. I could go wherever I wanted in this dream space, and I was safe wherever I went. All of that came to an end with a noise, a clatter, movement almost imperceptible in the corner of my right eye. I was instantly torn from my trance and tossed back cruelly into the physical realm. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled to attention as I turned slowly to face the source of the noise behind me. Nothing. Perhaps I had been imagining it. After all, things tend not to clatter in microgravity. They float and drift heedlessly, but never clatter. So it stands to reason it had simply been my mind playing tricks on me, manifesting noise where there was none. After all, nothing in the section of the station showed any sign of movement. Nervously gazing around the cabin, I shook my head in disapproval of the power of my own imagination and my initial foolishness for believing it. Nothing on the station could have made such a noise. In an attempt to settle myself again, I swam over to the main console and checked the thermometer reading. 19.8, just as I was expecting. Either the problem had fixed itself, and the temperature control had automatically reduced the station back to 19.8 degrees, or the problem was still there, but it was with the thermometer and not in fact the temperature control system. Either way, I was relieved not to be doused in sweat any longer. I had quickly resigned myself to the fact I wouldn't be getting any more sleep for a while. So, with a defeated sigh, I flicked on the switch for the main cabin lights. They blinked on one by one with a deep guttural hum, which was soon lost in the orchestra of other quiet whirs and buzzes. The light hit my pupils with a ferocious intensity, and I had to close my eyes to shield them. I had become adjusted to the comfortable dark, and my eyes were shocked by this new and frightening stimulus. The next order of business was to put some clothes on. In my sleeping underwear, I was beginning to feel a slight chill, and I would be a lot more comfortable in something warmer. Soyuz 21, do you read? I pulled up the zip on my jumpsuit as I spoke. After there was no answer, I leaned closer towards the radio mouthpiece, licked my lips slightly to moisten them, and tried again. Soyuz 21, do you read? Receiving, comrade. What can I do for you? The faint reply came. It was good to hear the voice of Commander Vostrikov again. Just wanted to tell you that the sensor problem is all cleared up, Commander. We're back at usual temperature. That's brilliant. Vostrikov was clearly relieved. I was worried for a minute there. How did you fix it? I breathed heavily, trying to form a response. The pause must have lasted a good second or two, because Vostrikov transmitted again. Alexei, are you there? How did you fix the temperature problem? I didn't do anything. I decided on eventually. Just went away on its own. Vostrikov wasn't pleased, clearly. I'm glad it's back to normal again. Well, yes, so am I. I'll talk to you soon. Vostrikov's voice was slightly frosty in this dismissal. I'll look forward to it. The radio crackled with static before falling silent completely. I replaced the microphone and pushed back away from the set towards the main console with the intent of once again checking the temperature. I gave an unconvincing laugh when I saw it was still stuck at 19.8. This was becoming my new obsession. With the temperature back to normal and the pain in my stomach gone, I was convinced I'd be able to make a better job of diagnosing the problem with the heating control. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case, and I managed to spend several hours once again vainly trying to plow my way through hundreds of wiring cases and circuit boards. Eventually, though, my frontal cortex began to throb from the sheer mental exertion of the work. It was an acute pressure that punched up my brainstem, across my scalp, and out my eye sockets. At one point, it became so bad, I had to let go of the manual I was reading to massage my forehead, in fear my skull would explode outwards. My vision blurred, bright red and blue patterns scarring themselves across my retinas like sheet lightning. Pins and needles crawled up my legs and arms, starting in just the extremities, then soaking upwards and inwards across my thighs and forearms. There was a rushing in my ears that drowned out most other sounds, but I just heard an odd, drawn-out croak on the edge of my audible range. It took a few seconds for me to realize that the noise was sliding from my own wide-open jaws. The pain was unbearable. Every second, I felt like I was about to drown in a sea of swirling fractals. Like the dam of my mind was going to shatter open, and my entire consciousness was going to be washed away by a flood of jarring flashes. With numb hands, I flung myself from my sleeping compartment. Any second now, I knew I would pass out from the searing heat in my head, and I wanted to be in my sleeping bag when it happened, so I didn't float around the capsule while I was out. I could barely see by the time I was in the sleeping bag, and as I fumbled for the restraints, I went. My face split apart and melted, exposing a bare skull, hard bone peeling back like warm butter. From the chasm in the front of my head, a blinding light spilled out, heat splashing across my head. More fractures opened across my temples and the back of my scalp beneath my hair. I could see my own brain separating into regular sections like a gelatinous white clementine. Or at least, that's what it felt like. The pain was too much. I closed my eyes and my mind shut down. I awoke staring at the plastic wall of my sleeping compartment, drained. The banging in my head had subsided. From the feverish dance of a several hundred-strong warrior tribe, in the midst of a ferocious and primal ritual, to the distant crackle of thunder above a darkened grassland, accompanied by the gentle crackle of rain. With some trepidation, I pulled at my sleeping bag and climbed out, waiting for the pain to return. But as my sweaty fingers played around the door handle, the fear subsided, and I gingerly slid open the door and floated out into the dark station. The main lights were off, casting the living area and the flight deck into an uncomfortable darkness, thick as honey, and seeping from every joint of the spaceship walls. It was split only by the bright neon of the station clock and the main console, which sliced through the viscous black with beams of gently sharp green, bouncing off the walls, and battling the darkness for control of the spaces above my head and below my feet. Another creak yawned through the capsule as I pulled myself out to the flight deck. Toward the radio, it still sent shivers down my spine, despite the fact I knew it was just the metal contracting due to a drop in temperature. Soyuz 21, do you read? Receiving OPS 3. The man on the other end of the radio wasn't Commander Vostrikov, and I hesitated when I recognized Flight Engineer Sergei Antonov's dry rasp. How's it going over there, Flight Engineer? I didn't like Sergei. It wasn't that he was particularly unpleasant. In fact, he had been mostly amicable whenever I'd talked to him. It wasn't even his rough voice, like sandpaper in my ears. It was his quiet lack of engagement with not only the mission but the whole of space. He always seemed distant, far, far away. Not like Vostrikov, who was only ever as far as the radio speakers. All is fine, comrade. Is Commander Vostrikov there? He's getting some sleep at the moment. I see. Have you had any contact with the ground yet? Sorry. Have the problems with the solar flares died down? You've reached ground on the radio communication network. Oh, yes, the solar flares, of course. No, we are still unable to reach them. Right. Well, can you keep trying? Yes, of course. It's our top priority. Okay, thank you. I hesitated before closing with my usual comment to Vostrikov. See you in 4 days. I suppose so. Sergei was distant, almost uninterested by the entire conversation. The radio went silent, leaving me with just the hiss of dead air, which rippled gently off the skin of the capsule. So it sounded like it was coming from every corner of the spacecraft at once. I flicked off the radio and tossed down the mouthpiece, watching it float on its coil for a few seconds before heading away to the shower compartment. For days, that's what I kept telling myself as I sat at the main console, flicking slowly through diagnostic programs, the bright green of the screen washing over the rest of the module. I had kept the lights off for now, just because it was so much more comfortable in the dark. With the bright lights constantly in my face, I could hardly concentrate. For more days, the sentence fragment that escaped my mouth was a surprise even to me. It was next to silent, and if I hadn't been completely alone up here, I would have dismissed it as background noise. I hadn't ever been one to talk to myself, and I was determined not to start now. My palms, still damp from the shower, had left prints, where I had been clutching the armrests of the seat. And with a start, I realized my hands had been clenched just a few seconds ago, tightly around the plastic. Just 4 more days. There was something off in the cabin. I could just feel it now. The equilibrium was off. Something had been moved in the corner of my eye, swirling round. I scanned the living area, suddenly aware of a slight change in the capsule. Once you live in a space for long enough, you become accustomed to every tiny detail, and even the slightest difference is like a blaring air raid siren. The medical cupboard was open, I realized. It was only slightly ajar, maybe just wide enough for me to fit my hand into, but it was noticeable enough for me to catch it on my second glance. How had it got open? I thought for a second, just floating silently, staring at the open cupboard. It had a sliding door, so it wasn't something that could just drift open with a draft. Not that there was one up here. How long had it been like that? It was impossible to tell. I finally willed my body into action, done with quietly staring, and crossed over to the cupboard. Perhaps I had left it open when I got the sleeping pills out last night. My train of thought faltered. Had it been last night, or the night before that I had taken the pills? I couldn't remember it properly. Nothing was in chronological order. I slid open the cupboard fully and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing had moved. The sleeping pills were still politely hidden behind bandages and unlabeled vitamin tablets, keeping up with the fiction that I never used them, that I could get to sleep on my own. Ops 3. I was almost asleep by the time Vostrikov called on the radio. My eyes barely opened more than a slit. OPS 3, do you read? I read you, comrade. How are you doing up there? Are you well? I must have hesitated for a second too long, because Vostrikov was suddenly nervous. What's happened? He demanded before I could speak. Nothing, I'm fine. Don't lie to me. Commander, I can tell something is wrong. I sighed audibly, then immediately regretted it. That would be only more confirmation to Vostrikov about my state of mind. Commander Morozov, I've been having sleep problems. Sleep problems? That's normal, so I hear. Weren't you briefed on that? I took the pills. The sleeping pills. You took them? Yes, they worked fine. We had been instructed back in Shkylkovo 14, the cosmonaut training facility, to not take the pills unless it was absolutely necessary, and under no circumstances take more than 4 at a time. That's it? Just taking sleeping pills. No, theirs. I hesitated again, this time because my voice was caught on the saliva on the edge of my windpipe. There's something else. My memory's getting fuzzy sometimes. What do you mean? I can't remember things properly. Today, I found a cupboard open, and I don't remember opening it. There was nothing but silence for nearly 30 seconds. I thought Vostrikov had abandoned me. Okay, look, I have to go. I have to check our oxygen filters. I'll talk to you soon. Vostrikov was obviously distracted, and over the crackle of interference, I could hear a faint muttering. Right? I'll see you in 4 days. The sun was just slipping through the blue band of Earth's atmosphere. As I took a quick glance from the flight deck porthole, it was almost fully extinguished, but long tails of light flared up through the dark. the last swan song of the soon-to-be-gone star. Sleep is a very loose term for what I had that night. I climbed in the sleeping compartment and stared at the wall. At some nondescript time, I fell into a semi-aware, semi-unconscious state. Not sleep, but somewhere in between, where my mind wandered. I was awoke, again in the loosest sense of the word, by another thermal ping. There was the faint taste of vomit and chemicals on the back of my throat. My eyes were watering. Thick streams of salty tears ran down my face and soaked into the neck of my sleep shirt. I didn't remember taking sleeping pills, but I couldn't deny the artificial mint that still hung in my mouth and nasal cavity. It could only belong to the pills. I hadn't eaten anything in days, and certainly not anything mint-flavored. With a groan, I probed the very edges of my sleeping bag and felt the strain in my muscles. They were tense and taut. It took some effort to get them to move. As with every slightest adjustment of my limbs came the sting of built-up lactic acid. The air in the sleeping compartment was stale, old. It felt like it had been through my lungs at least 10 times before, and it hung around me with a dreadful stillness. As I pulled myself from the sleeping bag, I could still smell the musk of my skin and my sweat. Everything reeked of it. Everything reeked of me. I opened the door, and my heart stopped. It stopped pumping. Warm blood turning cold in my veins, stationary. The contents of my stomach turned to ice. A great slush of freezing water that weighed down on my body and digestive system, if only figuratively. Thousands of goosebumps rippled across my bare arms and legs. The nerves of my skin suddenly several hundred degrees below zero. Black powder floated in a small cloud in the center of the living space. It looked for all the world like a nebula gone dark. Hundreds of tiny swirling peaks and troughs made of an infinite number of black pinpricks. Lord, I breathed disbelievingly. The carbon filter spun at the center of it all, glinting dangerously and disgorging more trails of carbon powder as it turned seemingly randomly through its cloud. How'd it got there? How the fuck had it got there? Good Lord, I repeated as I swam towards the cloud. I reached out, extending my hand through the dust, and clamped it around the filter. It was a small metal box about the size of a paperback book, with an opening at one end where the carbon was leaking from. The filter usually sat deep within the whirring mass of the air filtration system. There was an access panel used to change it in the flight deck, and my eyes immediately flicked up towards it when I remembered its location. Sure enough, it hung open. Soyuz 21. Soyuz 21. My voice into the radio was barely more than a whisper. In my head, my mind screamed, trying to drown out the uncertain knowledge I had gained since waking up. I was looking for an explanation. Any explanation. Perhaps there had been some microdebris impacts that had shook the filter loose. I hadn't felt anything, but then I would not have done if I had taken the sleeping pills. Perhaps there had been a pressure malfunction, and that had blown the access panel open and the filter out. Perhaps. There were so many possibilities, but no answers. Receiving OPS 3. Comrade. Nikolai. I used Vostrikov's first name in my strange state of shock. Try to connect with him across the void, across the great gap. I choked up, looking at the open access panel, and the filter, which I had left floating by it. When my throat cleared, my voice was barely a whisper. There's something wrong, comrade. There's something very, very wrong. Commander Morozov, what is the problem? Vostrikov was cold. I could hear a strange silence as his voice echoed away around his capsule. I couldn't speak. I couldn't say a single word. How could I explain? I decided to keep it simple, to ignore the terrifying implications of what had happened, to keep what I said of facts and nothing more. There's a problem with the air filtering system. What kind of problem? OPS 3. One of the carbon filters fell out, or got knocked out, or there I trailed off. After that point, the facts did not serve me very well. There was nothing I could say for certain. Do you think it's fixable? Of course it's fixable, but that's not the point. Say again, OPS-3? I need you to contact ground, Soyuz. Please, as fast as you can. I can't do that, comrade. The long-range communications are still out because of solar flares. Okay. Thank you, Commander. See you in 3 days. I was cold. My spine was chilled with a sharp tingle of nerves. Vostrikov was never this businesslike, never this disinterested, and it scared me even more than the problem with the carbon filter. If I could have seen him, I felt like he would not have batted an eyelid when I told him about it. I was on my own, it seemed, not even the comfort of my old friend on the other end of the radio. With Vostrikov in his current mood, I felt like talking to him any longer would be pointless. I began to rationalize in my head, and the primal spasms of fear inside my skull began to die down, comforted by warm and concrete logic. Nothing to fear. I had nothing to fear. I needed something to calm my nerves. We weren't allowed alcohol aboard the station, of course, but I was pretty sure there were some anxiety pills in the medicine cabinet. Pills. It was always pills. They were in another white bottle, marked with black text. They tasted like chalk. No artificial mint this time, as I felt the large lumps slide down my throat. My heart rate began to slow. Maybe half an hour passed before I began to really feel the effects. I could feel my heart beating heavily and slowly in my chest, each thump further away from the last, but heavier. The mass of muscle and veins straining to release itself from the confines of my fleshy body. Time was slowing down as I watched the sun slowly creep up across the side of the earth. The names of all the pills and tablets I had been taking began to run through my head. Aminoglutaric acid, atenolol, Decorus, Grandaxin, Oletotrine. The list stretched on and on. The names didn't mean anything, just odd foreign words that were a problem to pronounce, and an even bigger problem to spell. There was a small bead of sweat forming on my forehead. I could feel it just above my left eye. There were others lightly, and I'm sure they rippled each time my heart gave another thump. Thump. Nothing now but the sound of my heartbeat. In the porthole in front of me, my vision began to focus inwards, the edges blurring out. I was very close to the glass now, despite the fact I hadn't moved an inch. My field of view was rapidly zooming in on the geometric curve of the earth, as it was caressed by dark clouds. Thump. Everything else had passed out of my view. Now just a stretched and blurred mass on the edges of my vision. I was through the glass, and now looking at the vast face of the earth, as it turned seductively into the light of the sun. That great scorch ball of searing heat. Thump. My journey down was starting to speed up, still slow at first. I barely surpassed the speed of Salyut's orbit. But soon, my acceleration brought me up to greater speeds. The blue planet loomed up in front of me, and I was falling into its great yawning maw. The void whipped past me, as my speed reached unimaginable levels. The atmosphere was beginning to glow around my vision, burning first yellow then white hot. Clouds parted, and the patchwork green of the country sped towards me, seconds from impact. Thump. Jerking awake, I was pulled from my hallucination by the heavy beating of my heart. The pearl of sweat on my forehead had evaporated, leaving just a tiny white deposit of salt crystals. I was fine. I was still here. Just a slight dizziness remained from my hallucination. I needed a drink, I decided. I needed a drink and something to eat. My mouth felt like it was full of rock salt, and I really needed to wash that out. I grabbed a water bottle and started to drink the rubber-tinged water as I rooted through the cupboards and cabinets, trying to find some food that would be inoffensive to my stomach. Beef stew, it seemed, was the best choice. It came in a small tin that didn't require heating. Ripping off the lid of the can, a small blob of brown stew was dislodged from inside, and I watched it spiral away across the kitchen. It slammed into the side of one of the kitchen cabinets with a violent splat, leaving a dark brown smudge. Sat at the flight console. I tried to run the diagnostic program. I want to find out what time the filter had blown out and why the alarm hadn't gone off. Lines of code flickered down the screen. repeating over and over again. As I tried to connect with the diagnostic system, I could hear the memory disks whirring loudly as they strained to figure out what the sensors were doing. The computer insisted nothing was wrong. No alarms had been reported. No problems detected. Nothing. It was as if nothing had happened. The diagnostic finished and flashed up the results. 0 errors found. I slammed the side of the screen with my fist, and it flickered before I tore myself out of the console chair and headed back to the living area. I was halfway through forcing down another mouthful of the beef stew when I saw the writing on the wall. It was just above the fire extinguisher in the corner of the living area. Black marker pen, block capitals, written over the gray plastic like it was a page from a notebook. It was quite small, maybe only a couple of inches high, but clear enough for me to read without getting any closer. I am the one who lives. I am the one who lives. The phrase was written over and over again and again and again. I am the one who lives. I am the one who lives. Dozens of times, over and over, scribbled slightly differently each time, but always in the same black marker. There was a moment where I was frozen, beef stew halfway to my mouth, staring at the writing. I blinked a couple of times, slowly, trying to comprehend it. No, I said aloud. No, that's not possible. I kicked off from the chair and floated over to the wall. The writing was definitely real. It cast shadows under the neon cabin lights, and I could feel the indentations in the plastic where the pen had pressed into it. No, I said again. I put the spoon down on the wall and looked at it for a few seconds before looking back at the writing. Impossible. My hands were shaking, and I put them up to my face to stop myself from seeing them. Had I written it? I didn't remember doing so, but then I hadn't remembered taking the sleeping pills a night before either. My mind had been hazy recently, but surely I would remember doing something like this. There was no explanation. I turned to the radio. Soyuz 21? Commander Vostrikov, are you receiving? There was no reply. Vostrikov? Nikolai? Still nothing. I put down the receiver, heart pounding in my chest. The temperature was rising again. I could feel the sweat begin to bead on my forehead. I spun back to face the wall, as if I expected the writing to vanish the second I looked away from it. But it remained. I am the one who lives. I am the one who lives. I had to get rid of it. Floating into the medical locker, I pulled out a white cloth and soaked it in disinfectant solution. When I got back to the wall, I began to scrub at the letters furiously, my arm moving back and forth in quick jerks. Black smears began to run down the wall as the disinfectant lifted the ink. But even after several minutes of hard scrubbing, faint outlines of the letters still remained. I was shaking with adrenaline, and I pressed the cloth harder into the plastic, scraping at the writing until my fingers were raw. Eventually, exhausted, I dropped the cloth and floated back, breathing heavily. Most of the writing was gone. Only a few faded letters still remained, but they were still there. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't take any pills. I didn't turn off the lights. I just floated in the sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, watching the faint flicker of the fluorescent lights above me. My muscles ached. My stomach twisted. My brain pulsed against the inside of my skull. Every few minutes, I would glance at the wall, just to make sure the writing hadn't returned. It hadn't. Around 4 o'clock station time, I heard a bang. A sharp, metallic bang. I jumped, twisting in the sleeping bag, banging my shoulder against the wall of the compartment. There was silence for a moment. Then another bang, and another. 3 in total, each one from a different part of the station. I yanked open the sleeping bag and kicked off, floating quickly through the living area. Nothing had moved. Nothing was out of place. I hovered near the central core, heart pounding, sweat trickling down my temple. Then silence again. Thick, heavy silence. When I finally floated into the flight deck, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The access panel to the external override thruster system was open. Wide open. It was a secure panel, one that had to be opened with a special tool, one that should not have been opened under any circumstances. especially not while I was asleep. I stared at it for what felt like hours. It was too much. The writing, the filter, the noises, the panel. I wasn't alone. There was no other explanation. I wasn't alone on the station. There was nothing else I could do. I checked the override panel, but everything appeared to still be intact. None of the switches had been thrown, and none of the manual valves turned. But the fact it was open meant something. Someone had opened it, and it wasn't me. I closed it and sealed the locks, then floated back to the living area, where I strapped myself into the seat at the main console. The computer still showed nothing. Still read 19.8. Still insisted the station was functioning at optimum levels. I leaned back in the chair and rubbed my eyes. I hadn't spoken to Vostrikov in nearly 12 hours. He hadn't replied on the radio since the carbon filter incident. I needed contact with someone. I needed to hear another voice. I grabbed the radio receiver and tried again. Soyuz 21, do you read? My voice cracked slightly. Soyuz 21, this is OPS 3. Do you read me? A few seconds of silence. Then, crackling into life. We read you OPS 3. Commander Vostrikov is not available at the moment. Sergei. Again, that empty, disinterested voice. I hesitated before replying. I need to speak to someone. Please. It's important. You're speaking to someone right now, comrade. Sergei's voice remained completely monotone. No, look, something's wrong here. Something's seriously wrong. I paused, waiting for some response. But there was none. Sergei. Still silence. I'm not alone here. That made him speak. What do you mean? I don't know. I don't know. Things are moving. Things are being opened. I don't remember doing them. I don't know if it's me or someone else. Commander Morozov, Alexei, there's no one else up there. I know that. But something's happening. I saw writing. On the wall. I don't remember doing it. The filter, the override panel. I trailed off again. Maybe it's stress. Sergei said the words like he was reading them from a manual. You've been up there a long time, and it's very isolating. Perhaps you should take some time to rest. I'm not crazy, I said sharply. There was a long pause. No one said you were. The radio went dead again. I didn't try to call them back. I spent the next 3 hours going over every part of the station. Every hatch, every compartment, every control panel. I checked and rechecked the override locks. I made sure the fire extinguishers were in place. I examined the kitchen, the bathroom, the storage holds. Nothing seemed out of place. Everything was exactly as it should be. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Eventually, I returned to the flight deck and stared out the porthole. Earth turned silently below me. Blue oceans, white clouds, brown and green continents. So close, and yet completely unreachable. I pressed my forehead to the glass and tried not to cry. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I floated in the darkness of the living area, watching the clock slowly tick forward, second by second, minute by minute. At 3:47 station time, I saw the movement. Just a flicker, out of the corner of my eye, by the kitchen. I turned quickly, heart hammering in my chest. Nothing there. But I had seen it. I knew then. I knew I wasn't alone. There was someone else aboard the station. Or something. The next few hours are a blur. I remember the sound of breathing that wasn't mine. I remember hearing footsteps. There shouldn't be footsteps on a space station. No gravity. No surfaces to walk on. But I heard them. I remember the lights flickering. Just for a moment. Long enough for me to know it wasn't my imagination. I remember checking the storage cupboard and finding it open again. Wide open. Even though I had sealed it shut earlier that day. I remember finding scratches on the floor panels. Like fingernail marks. I remember opening the medicine cabinet and seeing half the pills gone. Gone. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember eating. I don't remember thinking clearly. What I do remember is the dream. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like I was wide awake, floating in the center of the living module, as weightless and still as death. The station was silent. The lights were dim. Everything was cast in deep shadow. And then I saw it. A shape. Just a shadow, really. At the far end of the module, near the science lab. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, almost perfectly blending in with the dark. But I knew it was there, and I knew it was watching me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I just floated there, paralyzed with terror, staring at that shape. And it stared back. Then it started to move. Slowly, soundlessly, it began to drift toward me. That's when I woke up, sweating, gasping, clutching at the sides of the sleeping compartment. But even after waking, the fear didn't leave me, because something was wrong. Something was off. The sleeping compartment door was open. I never sleep with it open. I always keep it closed, locked. I floated out into the main cabin, heart pounding. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. I could feel it. The station was different now. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a prison, and something was in there with me. The console lights flickered again. The temperature readout was blank. The computer wasn't responding. I tried to access the systems, but they were frozen. Every screen, blank. Every button, unresponsive. The entire station was locked down. Then the lights went out. Total darkness. No sound. No motion. Just the cold, endless dark. I floated there, frozen. Afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then I heard again. Breathing. Not mine. It was close. So close. Right behind me. I turned. Slowly. And there was nothing. Nothing but the dark. Then the emergency lights kicked in. Dim red glows along the floor and ceiling. Just enough to see the outlines of the station. But that was all I needed. Because in the brief flicker of red light, I saw the shape again, at the far end of the flight deck, watching me. I screamed, loud, raw. I grabbed the radio and hit the emergency broadcast button. So I used 21. Please, do you read? This is OPS 3. I need help. I'm not alone. There's someone. Static. Only static. I pounded the console. Tried again. And again. Nothing. Then a voice. Crackling. Just for a moment. Ops 3. What? See? Then silence. The shape was gone. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. I just floated in the red glow of the emergency lights. Holding the radio. Staring at the shadows. Waiting. Listening. I turned all the lights on. Every single one. Even the floodlights outside the flight deck. I didn't care about power consumption. I didn't care about glare. I just needed to see. To know that it wasn't hiding in the dark. For a while it helped. The shape didn't come back. The console lights stayed stable. The temperature stayed at 19.8. Everything felt normal, but only on the surface. Underneath, I could feel it. A pressure, a presence, something in the walls, in the air, watching, waiting. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I just floated, always watching, keeping the lights on, keeping the emergency beacon on. I tried the radio every 30 minutes. Nothing. Not even static now. Just dead air. I started talking to myself. Quietly at first. Then louder. I told myself stories. I gave names to the tools. The lights. The wires. Anything to break the silence. Then I started hearing it again. Scratching. At the far end of the science module. Like claws on plastic. Then the footsteps. Soft, shuffling, dragging footsteps. Moving slowly across the floor. Even though there was no gravity. It was playing with me. Testing me. I knew it was getting closer. I stopped going into the far end of the station. Sealed off the science lab. Shut the hatch and bolted it. But I still heard it. Behind the door. Scratching. Tapping. Sometimes whispering. I couldn't make out the words. But I knew it was calling me. The writing came back. This time in the sleeping compartment. I am the one who lives. Again and again. Covering the walls. The ceiling. The floor. I scrubbed until my hands bled. But it wouldn't go away. It was inside the plastic. Inside the walls. I ripped the panels off. Screamed into the ventilation system. Punched the console until the screen cracked. Still the words remained. Still the whispering continued. Then the dreams started again. Only this time, they didn't end. I would wake up, but still be dreaming. Still see the shape. Still hear the voice. Still feel the cold hands wrapping around my throat. I tried to kill it. I sealed off compartments. I flooded the oxygen system with carbon dioxide. I tried to open the outer airlock, flush the whole thing into space. But the controls wouldn't respond. The system locked me out. I tried to destroy the transmitter, tried to smash the navigation controls. But something stopped me. A voice inside my head. "We're the same now," it said. I didn't speak for 2 days. Didn't move. Didn't blink. Just floated. Empty. Then the radio crackled. A voice. "OPS 3. This is Soyuz 21. We are approaching docking range. Do you read?" My heart stopped. I grabbed the receiver. "Soyuz 21. Nikolai. Sergei. You have to turn around. You can't dock. There's something wrong. It's in here. It's with me." Silence. Then, "OPS 3. Confirm readiness for docking procedures." No, don't dock. Abort. I repeat, abort. "Alexei, this is Commander Vostrikov. We are 100 meters from docking. Confirm readiness." I sobbed, screamed into the mic. "You don't understand. It's taking control. It's inside the station. Please turn back. Don't open the hatch." Silence again. Then, softly, "We're already inside. That was 3 days ago. I haven't heard anything since." The station is completely silent. All the systems are down. The lights are off. The emergency beacon doesn't respond. Even the Earth is gone. I look out the porthole and see nothing but black. No stars. No planet. Just the dark. I don't know where I am. I don't know what I am. I think I died. I think the real Alexei Morozov died weeks ago. Maybe months. I think I'm just a copy. A shadow. I remember things that didn't happen. I speak in a voice that isn't mine. I move like I'm not the one in control. Sometimes I see my reflection in the porthole, and it's not me. It smiles when I don't. It blinks when I stare. It watches me. I try to sleep, but sleep doesn't come anymore. I just close my eyes and float. And when I open them again, the station is different. The walls are covered in writing. The modules are rearranged. Sometimes the air smells like fire. Sometimes I see shapes in the corners of my vision. It's never gone. It never left. It lives here now, inside me. I can feel it in my blood, in my bones, in my thoughts. It's changing me. I'm not afraid anymore. That's the worst part. At least when I was afraid, I knew I was still human. But now I don't even know what I am. I just float here, alone, silent, waiting for someone else to come, so I can show them what I've become, so I can whisper to them, I'm the one who lives. The Curse of Harold. In the late 1800s, Thomas Bell and his family moved into a mansion at the corner of Eaton and Simonton Streets in Key West, Florida, now known as the Artist House. The Bells were known to be stern with their servants, sometimes even mistreating them. It was the treatment of one such Haitian servant that provides a twist in this story. This woman was hired to take care of their son, Ethan. One day, Mrs. Bell supposedly witnessed her practicing black magic in their backyard and fired her. Before she left, the woman gave Ethan a lifelike doll. It stood 3 feet tall, had buttons for eyes, human hair believed to be Ethan's, and was filled with straw. Dolls that resembled children were not unheard of during this time, but this one proved to be special. Ethan named the doll after himself and often dressed it in his clothes. Harold, the doll, became his trustworthy companion. He took it with him on shopping trips into town. The doll had a seat at the dinner table, where Ethan would sneak at bites of food when his parents weren't looking. Ethan would even be tucked into bed with the doll at night. Soon, this innocent relationship took on a strange nature. Soon after, Ethan chose to be referred to by his middle name after being scolded by his mother. He told her that Harold was the doll's name, not his. Ethan was often heard in his toy room, having conversations with Harold. Ethan would say something in his childish manner, and responses could be heard in a much lower voice. Sometimes, Ethan would become very agitated, worrying the servants and his mother. She would, on occasion, burst in to find her son cowering in a corner, while Harold sat perched in a chair or on the bed, glaring at him. This was only the beginning. Household objects would be found thrown across the room. Ethan's toys turned up mutilated, and giggling could be heard. Whenever these unusual acts took place, Ethan always said Harold did it. The boy took the punishment, but always insisted that the blame was Harold's. As the mischief grew, more and more servants took their leave, and new ones were hired. The Bells' relatives felt it was time to do something. With the recommendation of a great aunt, Ethan's parents removed Harold from his care and placed him in a box in the attic. This is where he resided for many years. After the death of his father, Ethan was willed his boyhood home. He decided to live in the Victorian mansion with his new wife, Clara. Ethan had become an artist and felt the house was spacious and would provide a place for him to paint. He went to the attic and dusted off his childhood toy. He became attached to the doll, despite Clara's displeasure. Ethan would take the doll along with them everywhere they went. Harold even sat in his favorite little chair while Ethan and Clara slept nearby. The turret room became Harold's domain after Clara moved him back to the attic. Their marriage slowly became sour, until Clara supposedly went insane and died of unknown reasons. Ethan followed soon behind. Harold supposedly attacked people, sometimes locking them in the attic. People who passed by claimed to hear evil laughter coming from the turret room. For some time, Harold remained in the empty house by himself, until a new family purchased the mansion and restored it. The doll was once again moved to the attic. This pleased it as much as the last time. The doll was often found throughout the house. On one certain night, Harold was found at the foot of the owner's bed, giggling, with a kitchen knife in hand. This was enough to send them fleeing from the home. Harold was later moved to the East Martello Museum in Key West, where he sits perched in a glass box. Despite his new living quarters, the doll is believed to not have given up his menacing ways. Visitors and employees claim they have seen the doll move. His smile has been known to turn into a scowl. One employee cleaned Harold, turned off all the lights, and left for the night. The next day, he returned to find lights turned on, Harold sitting in a different position than the night before, and a fresh layer of dust on his shoes. Some say he'll even curse you. If you want to take a picture of him, you must ask politely. He'll tilt his head in permission. However, if he doesn't, and you take the picture anyway, a curse will befall upon you and anyone who accompanied you to the museum. The same will happen if you make fun of him. To this day, Harold remains at the East Martello Museum in his sailor suit, clutching his stuffed lion, continuing his menacing ways.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.